All right, let's do this. Who here has either a brother or a sister? Hands up, please. You know what I'm talking about. Growing up with siblings, there were times when you got along great, and there were times when you didn't. But you also knew that if you really wanted mom to do something, you absolutely had to get big sis or brother on your side. And sometimes they came through. And sometimes what you never thought would happen actually did. Well, professionally, we've all got those big brothers and sisters, and we need to work together to get some things done. Who are our big brothers and sisters? Well, outside of this room, who are the most influential people that you know? A government minister, a CEO, of course. But I bet on all of our lists of movers and shakers, there's someone on the UN, OSCE, the EU, one of those organizations. Now, why do they have the influence? Why do they have the power? Well, when we asked an independent researcher to ask more than 100 representatives of government, civil society, and donor organizations whether or not, for example, the EU had the influence to actually make national government reforms happen, you know what they said? They said yes, 100% yes. So how is it that for many of us, we see the EU or the UN where we go in to ask for money, where we seek them as a donor? But what about when we're not asking for funding? What if we're not asking for them to fund a project? We're actually asking them to press on national governments for things that we know that desperately need to be done. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. How we have learned to work with the big international organizations and donors that have so much influence in the places where we are there to help, civil society organizations like World Vision, where our objective is clear. So we're going to talk today about an evidence-based practice called Partner Up. Here's some news, bad news. A civil society organization can't move a mountain on their own. Yes, together we can sort of tumble some rocks down the hill, but it's easy for governments to turn a deaf ear to us. Remember, we are working for some of the most vulnerable members of society. They don't have a voice, they don't have a lot of influence, and they don't have a lot of power. And so what do? Remember, too, that the middle class and the wealthy, they don't have the same problems. They don't have the problems that the vulnerable do. If you've got money, you've probably got private health care. And if you have kids, you probably send them to private school. You might even have private security. So we can't count on them to use their influence to help the people that we serve. And as for politicians, don't get me wrong. They are out there, there's some good ones, but usually the only thing that gets them out is election day. And then they say some good things at election time. They say, education for all, health care, the children are our future. But once the election is safely away, those nice words can disappear. Out the window, a little puff of smoke. And yet we have these big brothers, big sisters, who, when they talk, government actually listens. So how do we know? We've seen this happen. After the fall of communism, I think most of us can remember the images that came out of the Romanian orphanages. Heartbreaking stories of appalling conditions in institutions. The authorities were dragging their feet about bringing change, and they were given a really big incentive. At that point, securing membership in the European Union was Romania's #1 priority. And all that needed to happen was that the EU was going to link future membership with child care and child protection. And all of a sudden, the mountain started to crumble. So Romania changed and its child care and provisions improved, and the EU's influence was that big. So seeing that happen, World Vision recognized the potential of working with organizations to carry out this sort of influence, and actually we could build a model with them to harness that potential. In the context of a 4-year World Vision grant received from the Australian government, we worked to figure out how we can better partner up with these big influential sister and brother organizations and governments at the top, that we could bring the much needed child protection reforms in these 5 countries in Eastern Europe where we tested this. And guess what we saw? We saw again and again that it works. Leaders in these international organizations like the EU and the UN also want countries to be healthy and have stable societies. But their challenge is that they aren't grassroots, and they don't know what's happening at the local level like we do, and they certainly don't know what's happening in the poorest and most vulnerable communities. They want to, and they are keen. And when someone can give them that insight, it is gold. And when civil societies join up and partner up together to share those issues, they can actually provide a level of detail and insight to these IGOs that actually gives them the power to work. So together, we can all speak with one voice. And in those places of power and influence, we can advocate for the most critical issues that affect the poor and the marginalized. So let me give you a couple examples. The first one from 2011. World Vision Albania had surveyed the number of government-funded child protection units across the country. And according to legislation, there was supposed to be 394. The survey counted 28. So child protection units staff social workers in communities that handle cases of violence reported against children. And without this advocate voice and expert at local levels, children can't often get the help that they need. So in coalitions of civil society, World Vision invested heavily in child protection units themselves, offering training and support to social workers. And we built the credibility to speak about the needs of more CPUs. We shared this with government and with the EU. We attended EU invitation events such as Progress Report and Human Rights Country Report sessions. And then we lobbied in Brussels, relying on our World Vision office in Brussels to build up the contacts and to set up meetings for us. The EU also attended events in Tirana. With members of the EU delegation, we were able to join up with them at key moments. So we started to see the numbers of CPUs funded and operated by government rise. And by the end of the project, the government had created a total of 189 CPUs. Here's another example. As part of our work in Armenia, civil society, that's World Vision and some local partners, we were pushing for a law on inclusive education to open up the mainstream schools to children with disabilities. And now this was a critical step in Armenia because they had been putting children with disabilities into institutions, and they'd become more and more marginalized. If children with disabilities could attend public schools in their own communities, then parents were often able to take care of their own children at home rather than sending them away to institutions. Well, because inclusive education is still or was still controversial in Armenia, the law was an important first step. Parliament submitted a bill for review in 2012, and so we partnered up. From 2012 to 2014, we worked hard on the EU, first to find the right person, and then to arrange meetings, and finally to lobby, cajole, persuade over a period of time to see that inclusive education, that we could make that difference together and that they could put the pressure back on national government. So we put inclusive education in the new national strategy on child protection in Armenia and asked the EU to continue that pressure over time. And that momentum built change. They used various diplomatic devices at their own disposal. The EU progress reports, they brought the issues up in meetings with ministers, and publicly it was even put in the EU food program, where child protection benchmarks, including this very one, urged action by the national government. Well, in 2014, the Parliament passed the Inclusive Education Bill, and the numbers of inclusive education schools began to rise. In 2010, there were 36. 5 years later, there were 100. Well, we tried this partnering up again and again. And over the course of 4 years, we've been able to verify that World Vision, in partnership with other local civil society organizations, contributed to 81 new measures, new policies, new implementation measures across 5 countries in Eastern Europe. And as a result, more than 2.3 million girls and boys received new rights and access to services that they hadn't before. And of that, 450,000 boys and girls were directly impacted by these new changes and changes in policy. These reforms, among other things, offer exclusive education for children with disabilities, add social workers to the local community level, create job standards for daycare and other services, and they also give effective and reliable care to children. Isn't that amazing? By working in partnership with other agencies and with these big brothers and big sisters, World Vision was able to impact for children on a scale much broader than we could in country by ourselves. In country, advocacy was good, but it could never achieve what we were able to achieve without our big brothers and sisters. That's not to say that we didn't work hard, but Partner Up has an overall roadmap to give guidance on 2 key steps I want to give today that show that we can interact with government donors in a different way to bring reforms at the national level. First and foremost, when they put out the welcome mat, we need to take up the invitation. The EU and the UN both hold periodic consultations with interested parties to find out their views. And these meetings do inform their policies. These consultations are open, and that can be the first step inside. And if we are prepared, these consultations can take on the form of written submissions and in-person meetings, and we should engage in both these levels of consultations. And it is not just the EU. Other bodies and donor governments also have consultation processes. The US State Department consults on the human rights country reports, and Council of Europe hosts a child rights civil society group, which World Vision is now a member of. There are a number of organizations who also have presence in Brussels and other global capitals, and as World Vision does. And we can use this presence to set 1 meeting, 2 meetings, and talk about the development of our work and on specific issues. And at the national level, we can work through foreign embassies to urge them to add their weight to the debate. And if you add the opportunities that come from partnership and coalitions that we are a part of, Eurochild, Child Pact, Concord, Interaction, and Special Sector Coalitions, then you can see that these too are a chance to lobby organizations and government donors so that they may lobby back to national governments. Second tactic. If you want to do this seriously, we need to look at the people who are tasked with advocacy and lobbying. There are people, personalities, and skills that are not afraid of this kind of work, this kind of outreach. Just like we have finance, HR, IT, we need to hire effectively for this experience, for this role, for people with experience in government and in international agencies who do not fear engagement and with any and all people of power or of influence. I bet that there isn't a single person watching this who hasn't spent time despairing of being able to get through a change they know to be vital and which they're sure will change lives. We know that these days, increasingly, we're gonna have to use every tool at our disposal, and this one is critical. I can't guarantee that every door will be open or that we won't have to work hard to get our point across, but I can promise you that at the highest levels with these international organizations and donors, as we saw in Eastern Europe and in child protection reform, are people who are seeking this very input, insights that we can give them because we are working locally and seeing the needs in the communities. We are the link between the poorest and the most vulnerable people that we work with and the people that have the power to change their lives. It's our job and our duty to make sure we are doing everything in our power to bring about the changes they so desperately need. And we simply need to partner up. We have seen through the practice of Partner Up that it works. 81 reforms, over 2.3 million boys and girls reached. The Partner Up evidence-based practice teaches that we can do this. Let's work more closely with our big brothers and sisters. We know it will bring results. If you want to know more about Partner Up or any of the Evidence for Change work that World Vision is doing, there is a website, wvevidenceforchange.org. Thank you.